By the way, I mean, obviously, as you served, I thought, like, boy, it's all the awful news, the genocide in Ukraine. We had yet another mass shooting here, and I just loved what you said on Twitter. You said, "I slept, ate, trained, and patrolled with an assault weapon for 4 years as a Marine. Weapons of war have no place on our streets. I'm honored to receive the Brady campaign's endorsement. Together, we can build a future free of gun violence." This T-shirt I'm wearing was initially for the Parkland kids. We call BS, if you remember that powerful rally right after Parkland. But, as you and anyone that served, I've heard it over and over again, that saying, these weapons of war do not belong on our streets. Right. Do we ever have a chance of getting them off of our streets?
We do, but it's going to require Republicans to come to their senses. That sense that weapons of war have no place in our streets, that's not just shared by many veterans, that's shared by the supermajority of gun owners. Yeah. And that's what's so frustrating about this policymaking process in Washington, is that the two chief priorities of gun violence prevention groups are universal background checks and safe storage laws. Neither of them are controversial with the majority of gun owners, and certainly not with the majority of Americans. This is just common sense. This is how the military does it. This is how responsible gun owners do it. This is how responsible business owners do it. And yet Republicans are so afraid of the 10% of their base that are rabid gun rights advocates that they just refuse to pass common sense legislation.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of actual war, you tweeted, "In a war, speed kills. Russia's military is bogged down, allowing Ukrainian forces to demobilize and demoralize Russian troops. We need to help the Ukrainians hit hard and hit fast." What is the state of that, in your opinion, in terms of what they need and what they've gotten?
Are outcycling the Russians. And if you bear with me for a moment, I want to expound on that, because I think it's really important for how we think about this conflict. There has been a lot of attention on firepower, right? On S-300s and Javelins and Stingers and anti-armor and anti-air weapons. And that is critically important. We should provide every weapon that Ukraine needs, and we are. We should help them train and repair those weapons. All that's important. But in a war, it's speed that kills. And I don't mean speed as in horsepower, as in how fast your tanks go forward or backwards. I mean speed of decision-making and action. Your ability to observe a new development, orient to that new development, make a decision based on that new development, and then act. And the faster that you can cycle through those 4 steps, observe, orient, decide, and act, you can get inside your enemy's decision-making process. You can demoralize and then demobilize them. The Ukrainians have been doing that for the last 5 weeks. The Russians were slow. They weren't just slow in the sense of having a 40-mile convoy that was stuck in the mud. They were slow in their ability to adapt to new circumstances, to make decisions, and to act on those decisions. The Ukrainians have been fast, and we've seen morale within Russian forces plummet, and we've seen them be impaired in reaching their objectives. Now that they are redeploying from Kiev to the east, and they're preparing for an epic battle, in a critical eastern city in Ukraine, now is the time for us to pick up the tempo even further. Not only should we be sharing with Ukrainians every weapon that we have, we should be sharing with them actionable intelligence and paramilitary support so that they continue to operate within hours, not days, and continue to hit key Russian logistics and command and control functions. That is what really is going to ground this Russian advance to the halt. This battle coming up in this critical Ukrainian city, I think is going to be the deciding one. It's going to decide whether Russia is going to be able to control the Donbass or not, and those facts on the ground will drive the diplomacy in Turkey.
Another element of it, Representative, that you tweeted about, you said oil, gas, and coal provide hundreds of billions of dollars to fund Putin's barbaric war machine. China continues to insist that its friendship with the Kremlin knows no limits. It's on the wrong side of history. We must enforce blockade or face significant consequences. I mean, is it John McCain that said they're basically a gas station with nukes? So it kind of makes sense to shut down the gas station, right?
Without question, Stephanie. And for decades now, China has been insisting that it must be treated as a great nation, as a superpower. Great nations don't look the other way when atrocities are being committed. Great nations don't sit on the sidelines of history. Great nations take a side and they do the right thing, and China is not stepping up to that role. I have been heartened to see that more and more Chinese financial and economic institutions are self-sanctioning, that they're actually refusing to sign or import Russian oil, but we need to take it a step further. And I think it's important to put some math around that, because oftentimes we speak in terms of energy with kind of a hand-waving statements, and we need to actually be precise about it. The world consumes about 100 million barrels of oil every single day. Russia exports roughly 5 million barrels of oil every day. If we were to enact a full energy blockade of Russia through secondary sanctions, meaning that we prevented other countries from transacting with Russia, the market entirely, that would deprive Russia of hundreds of billions of dollars that it is taking in right now over the course of 2022 to fund its war and its government. That would be a devastating and I think decisive blow.
I mean, the good news headline is Congress votes overwhelmingly to suspend Russia's trade status and ban oil. In the House, your good friends Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, and Thom voted against banning Russian oil and on a war crimes probe. What's it like to serve with, I don't know what else to call them, but Putin sympathizers or whatever they are? I don't even know what their reasoning was for voting against that. Do you?
It's the Tucker Carlson caucus.
Yeah.
And the most, you don't reason with people like that. Obviously, I'm not sitting up there rolling up my sleeves and trying to get to yes, right? With those kinds of folks, what you do is you make very clear to the American people what their values and priorities are, and then you campaign. We need to hang Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz around the necks of every Republican candidate in this country and say to them, are you for or against this style of governance? Because this is what you're going to get with Kevin McCarthy holding the gavel, is you're going to get somebody who is afraid to say no to Madison Cawthorn, who's afraid to say no to Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's the one who's going to be opening up the envelopes in January 2025 to tabulate electoral votes. He's the one who's going to be one of the most powerful people in the country, and he can't even control the likes of the Tucker Carlson caucus. So we need to make it a campaign issue in the midterms. That's how you deal with it.
Yep. You also tweeted, I just voted to hold Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino in contempt of Congress. A subpoena isn't a suggestion. I keep saying that, Representative. This is not an invitation to a party in the Hamptons. This is, we have got to reclaim the rule of law in this country, don't we?
Without question. And there's so many elements of that. That's not a one-time fix, of course. Trump did such damage, whether it was the immigration courts, whether it was the separation of powers, and we have got a lot of work to do, and I know the Biden administration and this Congress is committed to it. One thing to watch closely is the results from the January 6th Commission, and whether we're able to bring Representatives Cheney and Kinzinger along with recommendations based on the fact pattern that is laid out by the January 6th committee. That, I think, would be an important step towards the rule of law. I know people, the American public in poll after poll says they're sick of hearing about January 6th. They want us to move on. I hear that sentiment, and yet I would say that for the good of the rule of law and for the good of our democracy, we need to transcribe for posterity what happened and how we're going to prevent it from happening again.
Someone made such a salient point on Twitter, Representative, that I read earlier about, us remembering 9/11 and the brave Americans who prevented an attack on the Capitol on Flight 93. And the fact that, the former president and possibly members of your body helped attack the Capitol on January 6th. I mean, it's just sort of stunning, I think, where we stand in America today, isn't it? Whether it's some of your colleagues voting, not to hold Russia accountable, or the terrorists from January 6th.
I hear and agree with you. I do want to emphasize with the Russia sanctions, though, the overwhelmingly bipartisan nature of the support for Ukraine. We should not let MTG and others steal the spotlight away from where it rightfully belongs, which is the fact that under President Biden's quite successful statesmanship, the United States Congress really is united. To lay a short anecdote, I was talking to a colleague of mine who had been overseas on a bipartisan congressional delegation only a few weeks ago, and he said before they left the plane, when they landed, the Republican members of that delegation said to him, when we set foot on foreign soil, we don't criticize the president. And I want to emphasize to our listeners that is still
I remember
how Congress operates most of the time.
Yeah, okay, I remember that. Yeah, it's like they're internet trolls. Let's just ignore them.